Candice Burt, it is a pleasure to have you on the Singletrack podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here. I was telling you offline there are so many topics that I want to cover with you. I'm not sure we'll get to all of them, but hopefully a bunch. The first, we talk a lot on this show about long distance trails and FKT attempts and just like the aura around a lot of these things like the PCT and the AT and the Colorado Trail. I know that the Arizona Trail has meant a lot to you. It's something that's really only coming on my radar as that area of the country becomes more interesting to me. Talk about what attracted you to that trail to begin with and what makes it worth, investing in over a multi-year span.
Well, I love running long distances. And for me, back around, I think it was 2019, I was interested in doing a trail that would take kind of like 2 weeks or less, or roughly that time frame, because I have kids. And so I can't just go do the PCT for, a month and a half. And of course, now I just had a daughter graduate high school, and my other
Nice.
daughter's going to be a senior next year. So I am getting into territory eventually of being able to do the longer stuff. But I just thought 800 miles, it's doable for me to be gone for several weeks rather than several months. And yeah, so I think what happened is it began to really intrigue me after I failed the first time in 2020. I realized that Arizona was a lot more diverse and challenging than in my head I had thought it to be. So it was more rugged, more technical, ton more climbing. I was thinking Arizona is like pretty flat, but it's not. Like the trail itself, you look ahead, you could see all the mountains coming up, and there's a lot of mountains in Arizona. So I was pretty new. I'd grown up in Washington State, so that kind of terrain and desert was really interesting, and it was like being on a different planet. So in 2020, we all know COVID happened. They closed the Grand Canyon when I was about 350 miles into the trail. So we called it, but I had also realized while I was on the trail that I just wasn't adequately prepared. I had been hoping to do the trail in 12 days, and I wouldn't have been able to do it in 12 days in 2020. But yeah, I think that the challenge just intrigued me, and it's taken all kinds of prep to get even close to getting more than halfway.
I made a note to come back to a couple of things. Selfishly, I'm curious to learn how you have managed to be excellent at a lot of things, especially given that you're a mom. I have a kiddo on the way in September, so that's
Oh,
selfishly
cool.
a topic I'm interested in. But
Yeah.
a little bit more on the AZT, like talk about the geography, right? Because the southern half of it, from what I understand, like the Tucson area, the Phoenix area, is markedly different from what you experience up in like the Grand Canyon section, getting into Ponderosa Pines. And then I've also heard that like compared to the PCT and the AT, like there are parts of it that are either overgrown or not quite finished. So maybe it's a more rugged experience.
Yeah, that's true. And there's the other thing that makes it really challenging that the PCT and the AT don't have is just the lack of water sources.
Mm.
So you're having to carry a lot of water even if you're supported. Your crew can only get out to so many places. There would be stretches of 30, 40 miles where crew just couldn't get out to. And this last attempt that I did this year, we actually had a horrible situation where we'd expected to see crew. I was supposed to be done around like midnight or 1 or 2 a.m. And it ended up taking longer, but crew couldn't get to the mile 20 spot, and then they couldn't get to the mile 34 spot. And we ended up going 42 miles through the night, arrived at 7 a.m., no calories, like no extra batteries. It was just a slog. So stuff like that can happen. And it could be not only, detrimental to your energy stores for the next 500 miles, which kind of happened to me, but also, you're endangering your life when you don't have your warm clothes and your extra batteries. Yeah, really challenging. So there's just stuff like that. I mean, 800 miles, it's hard to really nail the logistics of even a few hundred miles.
Mm.
I know this from putting on races, but yeah, we tried our best, and there were just so many things like that.
Would you say more than the physical and the mental on these types of things, the logistics are the hardest part to nail?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If you're doing it self-supported, there's a little bit less to rely on other people. In some ways, I think people have been really successful self-supported on this trail, because there's only so many spots that you can go resupply. And so it cuts down the number of potential problems. I was trying to do 100K a day, and I started out on this year doing 72 miles on day one. And then I had to do a short day, 56 miles, because you hit the Micah Mountain climb, which would be 24 more miles with no crew. So I wasn't going to do that through the night.
Yeah.
And then I did another 60 miles through 2 mountain ranges ahead of the men's and women's record. I was just cruising. And when I hit the Gila River spot I was telling you about, where the crew couldn't get to me, that's when it really started to go downhill, because I was pushing so much my edge of sleep and calories that going for 40 miles without any resupply, basically I had like 7 hours of no calories through the night. That hit me really hard in the next 150 miles. I couldn't even barely walk up hills when I got to mile 350. It was bad.
One thing I'm curious to kind of hear you riff on is whether or not there's any sense of satisfaction, even if things don't go totally according to plan or you don't get the FKT this time around. Is there a level of enjoyment that you got to spend, X number of days pushing yourself pretty hard, covering a lot of miles? Like, is there some sort of redeeming value in that for you?
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about, like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And I'm definitely at a point with my running where I do it for myself and my own curiosity. And the Arizona Trail is just one of those things. I think that I definitely expected to get it this year because I was so prepared. I mean, I don't think anybody's come to that FKT as prepared as I was. But we still got hit bad with logistics. And I had the same crew chief this year's in 2020, and we'd gone over all these details. And we didn't have 4 people, wasn't enough crew. There were so many things. I wasn't getting enough calories. And then unfortunately, probably 2 big things, the energy reserves I lost with missing crew and not having enough calories. And then I went into it with a really inflamed foot. So I was seeing the doctor just like 3 days before and considered not starting, but everybody was heading to Arizona and my foot was just all swollen up already. So I did start it. I ended up having to wear Nike Alpha Fly road racing shoes the whole way because my foot wouldn't fit in anything else. And I could stretch those with shoe stretchers. So I wore those for 456 miles of the Arizona Trail. It was crazy. Brutal.
Are you going to go back next year or at some point in the near future?
Yeah, I've recognized that I need to get this foot surgery to deal with this issue. I can run now, but to do that many days of running, it's going to keep cropping up again.
Yeah.
So would I love to do it next year? Yes, but I think I'm going to be out for probably 6 months of racing. So yeah, it's a long time.
Okay.
They basically have to realign the big toe. He said it's the worst bunion he's ever seen. So,
Oh my
and this is a doctor who does his surgery. Like 75% of his surgeries is this, and he does them every week. So, yeah, good stuff.
I don't know if you've had surgeries in the past, but like I've had shoulder surgery before. I've had a couple other surgeries, and at least for me, they've always been marketed to me as like liberating opportunities where you can get back a certain amount of range of motion or comfortability. So I know that they can be traumatic, but at least for me, I feel like I've become progressively more like a bionic man, and I'm a better version of myself on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, there's a surgery should always be a last resort after you've tried all the other stuff because you don't know how it's going to turn out. And once you cut into the body, there's, stuff you can't undo.
Yeah,
So I'm kind of at the last resort. Could I keep running? Absolutely. But I can't do these long projects. And if I was a non-runner, it probably wouldn't matter either. But again, it's just, I can't wear trail shoes anymore. The right foot is just too, it's just too big through the forefoot
sure.
to fit. What's funny is we had a video crew for this whole Arizona trail attempt, and I've always been really embarrassed about the foot. And here we are, like it's all about the foot, and it's all this video of the foot, and I'm just like, I don't even show the foot usually on social media. I'm like, you guys don't want to see it. And here we are, and here you and I are talking about this foot. But but it is what it is. Like I've pushed my body a lot, and that area is hypermobile. And so when you have a hypermobile joint above your big toe, you get all kinds of problems when you're running a lot or doing the kind of stuff that I do. It's just totally twisted and turned the joint out. Um,
Are you going to publish any of that content, or will it become part of like a multi-year film project slash odyssey?
I have yet to see what the videographers have come up with, but we're going to have probably like a 12-minute documentary. So,
Nice.
assuming that it's not really really bad or something. I mean, here's the thing: the videographers that I had are incredible, and they've worked with a bunch of high level TV shows. So I assume that they're going to do a good job. But I think it is sometimes hard to see yourself going through what I went through on the trail. Yeah, me and my crew just had some really huge emotional, like, what would you call it? It was like we realized things out there that you could never easily get in real life, and they're life changing moments. But there's like one that I wrote about on my Instagram where I'm like curled up in the fetal position, like sobbing. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to make it at this point. And my friend Tasha came, she was pacing me on that section, and she hugged me, and we were just, like we had this moment where I suddenly realized that the reason that I was having such a hard time with not being able to finish this year was I had this belief that people wouldn't love me if I couldn't do this.
Mm.
And I told her that it just came out. It was like, this fear came out. And I think that I would have never realized that it was that strong of a fear in daily life. But man, I've been able to kind of think about that and how I approach the challenges that I do and why. And that shifted my whole life. So can something like this that on the surface you would call a failure be more meaningful than finishing up in Utah at mile 800? Absolutely. This was way more meaningful than a finish because I mean, I realized that my worth isn't tied to what I do, which is kind of cool.
It's so interesting that so much pressure was put on that project, because when I observe you, I would assume that like the athletic part of your life is totally just like one compartment, and you've got all these other concurrent projects and identities that are equally, if not more, um, uh, like an interpretation in the community. Like more people might see you, at least in the current moment, as like this, successful race director putting on, these kind of like cutting edge 200-mile races. And like, if you continue to do great things athletically, that's awesome. But it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I think we all have our own view of ourselves, and then everybody has their own view. It's always interesting to kind of hear that. But yeah, I think for me, I do think that for a long time, I did tie my self-worth to my achievements in general, and that could be with work. So it's
Yeah.
it's kind of, if I fail at work, I would feel similarly. Um, And I think that this Arizona trail, because I had gone for it multiple times, and this seemed like it was going to be the year, it felt like that whole ego piece was more tied into it than most projects.
I'm curious because you talked earlier that you're at this point in life where you're about to be an empty nester, which is interesting, and you even kind of maybe teased getting into longer stuff in the AZT at one point. But talk about how much you anticipate your daily life changing. If you have kids, out of the house, maybe focused on professional stuff or going to school, stuff like that.
I mean, I think it does kind of completely change training to have nearly 100% of your time dedicated to, these, let's call it selfish pursuits. Nothing wrong with that. I think, there's a time and place in all of our lives where we kind of get to focus a little more on ourselves. But I had my first daughter when I was 23. So I've had kids like, basically, I was barely out of my own parents' house when I had my first daughter. So I've really been a parent for a very long time. And there's a lot of things I've wanted to do that I've kind of held off on because I want to make sure that I'm there for the kids. But then I'm also thinking, in my head, I'm like, I'm 42, how many more years of this do I have? So it's kind of an interesting, I'm struggling, I think, a little bit in my 40s with that idea that am I near the end of my competitive career for whatever that's worth? I've never completely focused on running as a career itself, but it's always been really important to me to be competitive. And so I do sometimes worry about that. But then last year I was able to run an ultramarathon a day for 200 days. And
Yeah.
I couldn't have done that in my 20 or 30s. I didn't have like the range. So who knows what's possible? I don't know. We'll see.
The last thing I want to acknowledge on the AZT, and so we're recording this in late May, and I just because Heather Anderson has been a hero to me because I kind of grew up in the thru hiking scene and then got into trail, and I was blown away by her unsupported effort and just like seeing from the photos how large that pack was, and because you talked about from a resource standpoint, that's part of what makes the AZT so challenging is you have to carry a lot of that. There's not many refilling opportunities. And I'm kind of rambling here, but I concurrently, totally coincidentally, I'm reading a book, and it's called The Last American Man by Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if you've read it, but she wrote like Eat, Pray, Love, and it's about this guy named Eustace Conway. And we talk about all these different ways you can do an FKT, and one of the stories in the book is how he went to Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, and after graduating, he through hiked the Appalachian Trail, but he did it totally unsupported. And like as you can imagine on the Appalachian Trail, like unsupported means like you have to hunt your own food, right? Like he brought like a bow with him and all that kind of. Anyways, we'll link to it in the show notes. It's an incredible book, but I'm reading that book at the same time that I learned that Heather does this unsupported effort on the AZT, and I'm just blown away. Like every single one of these efforts is incredibly impressive and unique in their own right, but like I didn't even know that this was possible. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but it's it's timely.
Yeah. I mean, first off, she did it in 24 days and change, let's say. I know it was like 24 days ish. That's incredible. I know what she went through in terms of, I've done some self-supported stuff out there. It is really challenging to not have other people or like to look forward to towns or any kind of resupply. I think 24 days, this might end up being, in my mind anyway, one of the most impressive records of the year. Because it's like, there's so much athleticism required to carry that amount of weight. Doing the miles that she did, it takes a certain kind of athlete. I'm not surprised that she was able to do that. Heather and I used to run together all the time in Bellingham.
Wow.
And so, so back when I was first putting on events, I put on a trail series in Bellingham, and she was living in Bellingham at the time that I got to know her. So we would do runs and we would compete at Hurt together. And Yeah, this was before she set any of her amazing long distance records, and then she went on to do all that, and it's just, yeah, it's mind blowing. We were in the same town, and yeah, Bellingham is definitely a runner's paradise, if you don't mind the rain. That is.
No, I've heard great things. I almost did. This is dating me, but I almost did. It was like there was like a North Face event up there. It was at North Face Endurance Challenge Bellingham. This would have been in like 2012 or 2013, maybe mid 2010s. But I've always wanted to go. I've been to Seattle, but never been to Bellingham.
Yeah, I'm not sure about I don't think there was a North in 2012, but I know they had the one in San Francisco. That was
Okay.
a big one, but
Okay.
maybe I'm missing something. But yeah, it's cool how you know, these small communities have so many amazing athletes coming out of them. But yeah, Heather's somebody to always watch because she's got an incredible mental ability to push through levels of suffering that I don't think I would want to. Like, I can suffer doing high miles and lack of sleep, but like with through hiking, you have to be willing to like not shower or bathe for like weeks or months, or yeah, I like to be clean, and that's I think, we all have our limits. I'll do 100K a day, but I would like to have a shower occasionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am very impressed with that effort that she did. It's knowing the Arizona Trail. It's very impressive.
Well, going back to what you said earlier about, wondering when you're in your early 40s how much more of a competitive timeline you have. To me, and again, I'm not as well versed in it as you are, but it seems like these long distance trails, you could buy yourself maybe 10 or 15 more years of like high level efforts because, like you said, a lot of it comes down to just that like year over year accumulation of becoming more mentally tough. And then you have this, decades long aerobic base. I don't know. I feel like, you still have a lot of time to do a lot of cool stuff in this arena.
Yeah, I believe that as well, and I think a lot of us do struggle with this idea that being an athlete is like age dependent. So I would love to break that stereotype for my own self, and other people, but I do recognize those thoughts, coming in, and yeah, I think it's definitely possible because the range of speed, versus logistics and like nailing all these other things. Speed is slightly less important on the long distance stuff, and logistics, resilience, like you said, mental ability to withstand certain kinds of suffering. Those are far more important. Yeah, so if you have that aerobic base, then there's a lot of possibility. A lot of fun to be had.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier too that you've never totally focused on the athlete side as a career. Like you've staked out this awesome, track record of being a race director and bringing sort of 200-mile events into the fold. But I believe you have had experience like working with brands and stuff. And this is a pretty topical conversation at the moment as a lot of fellow athletes are trying to become more educated in this realm and make good choices and have good relationships. What's been your experience over the years with sponsorships? And I guess looking back, what worked for you, what didn't, what recommendations do you have?
Yeah, I mean, the realm of sponsorships is tough. I realized pretty quickly in the industry that if I wanted to make a living, I had to do my own business, and produce some kind of value outside of just running. I think it kind of depends on how you perform at a high level in ultras. Like Courtney Dauwalter can win pretty much any ultra, so she probably makes a pretty good living winning and racing. But I think for most athletes, that ability to win, it's going to go up and down. And sponsors that are already in the sport, they already have people's attention. So like shoe sponsors, for example, we all know about Hoka and Ultra and these Nike, these brands. So we have to think about it this way, like what's it worth for those brands to just pay athletes to run in their shoes? Like there is value, certainly, but it's not as much as maybe finding a niche sponsor who isn't in the sport, who wants exposure. So there are ways of making money. And for me, like, I was able to make money off of being an athlete, having a lot of followers on social media, and having events. But would I have been able to get that kind of money from sponsors if I didn't have events and big social media? Definitely not. So I realized that, like, brands would value the social media side and my ability to create content as much as me, winning something. And I know that sometimes athletes don't like that fact that somebody who has social media influence can make more money than maybe a better athlete. But it comes down to exposure for the brand and the business. And if you think about it from their perspective, an athlete does need to have some kind of audience for it to be worth it for them. It's just cold, hard truth. So if we're good at creating content and getting people engaged, then brands will be more interested in us as well. And it's just becoming the way even more than ever before of, businesses being able to promote themselves. And with my races, I never did magazine ads or anything like that. I always just did social media. I created my first events in 2012. Yeah. And at that point, it was all shifting. So it's really important.
Just looking at your Instagram, for example, you can tell that there's sort of a lot of TLC put into each post. You can tell that you're really going in depth. You're kind of speaking and writing from the heart. Is that something that comes naturally to you? Did you have sort of people in the past that you followed and you were inspired by the way they approached these channels? Talk about that.
I think it's more that I love writing and I love taking photos. So combining those two on somewhere like Instagram or Facebook was natural for me. And I enjoyed sharing as I started to get more of an audience. It was kind of fun to have that back and forth of, people are reading this work, and it's more meaningful to me when the audience is bigger, because I feel like I have more ability to reach more people. And so I put more thought and time, I think, into those posts. I kind of came up with like a little bit of an angle that I like when I write a post, where I like to try to get into a moment that was meaningful to me during a run or an FKT, and then right from there, instead of being more general and writing about the whole thing, but just try to put people in that moment that I was in on the Arizona Trail, or when I saw the hallucination of the black cat, and then we ended up going the wrong way on the trail, and the black cat was a symbol that came out of my head into reality. So there's things like this that I think are interesting, and I just kind of try to pick things like that, and then promote the 200s from time to time.
I want to reiterate what you said there about starting from a particular moment. And again, a lot of events sort of cascade on themselves. I was just talking with Mike Versteeg, and one of the things that we talked about was his race report from the first year of Cocodona. And it was such an unusual race report because it was nothing about, his experience at an aid station and like how many gels he took and, how he felt physically like over the course of the race. It wasn't like a transactional, here, learn from me about this type race report. It was very much like stream of consciousness, and every single paragraph was just all of the thoughts racing through his head at major checkpoints. And it was totally unusual. We might link to it again in the show notes, but it just reminds me like that you can bring so much creativity to the table. And just because there's a certain template for how some or even most people are approaching content on social, like start from where you're motivated to create. And it's like, it just seems like that comes naturally to you.
Yeah, I always think of everything I do kind of like, if you're an artist, like, how do you want to tell that story? Even to the point of, I feel like as athletes, we're artists, of movement, and journey and adventure, and telling a story through our bodies and our experience in, our performance. We could tell some kind of hero's journey or tragedy or all these different things through our ability to perform. And we are performing on some kind of stage when we do a race. As a race director, I think about this. What is the stage that I want to set for the runners who are running my race? What do I want the start line to look like, the finish line, the aid stations? How excited are they going to be to come into a themed, Alice in Wonderland aid station at mile 120, the Tahoe 200.
Yeah.
So it's important. I think when you think about it that way, it gives maybe a little more meaning to the small things that we do on a daily, monthly, yearly basis.
What's it like having a huge following? Like, is it something that you think about every time you're creating a post? Do you try to separate yourself from it? I have to imagine that by and large, a lot of the feedback you get is positive, but we're humans. And so if you get negative stuff, you can latch onto that. Like, I'd love to hear you talk about sort of the psychology of having to manage that large audience, because you have, over probably close to 200,000 followers at this point. Like, I can only imagine like the challenges there. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it would be easy to get too much in your head overthinking every little thing when you have that many people watching. But at the same time, I try to still keep it kind of real and authentic for what I want to write about. I do probably post less because if it doesn't feel like I have something significant to write about, I'm not just going to post a picture from my run. But I think Instagram's changing in that way where if I'm posting something less significant, it's all, my stories. And so I think people are posting less in general in terms of reels and actual posts, and more kind of in the stories. That's the trend that I've seen to some degree, because creating reels and posts just takes so much more time too.
Yeah.
So I think, having an audience, I still just try to go back to, what I want to share and doing something meaningful. And in terms of, getting feedback from that many people, I think it can be challenging. You have to separate yourself, though, from some of the feedback you get. I think it's important to take feedback that you get and consider it. But then there are certainly people out there who just kind of want to say something mean and you have to just let that go. I mean, I see people talk about their haters and their trolls, and I've been there. Like that, I feel like that was like 5 years ago when it was like, oh, it's so hard to have these people that hate me that I don't even know. It's like, does it really matter? What it means is that you're reaching a ton of people, and that is, you just have to look at it that way. Like that is a huge positive. So I try not to think about or focus on or post about any of that, because it takes away from the fact that, like what you said, 99% of the interactions I have are so positive and inspiring that I'm not going to take time to, do a post about a troll that doesn't deserve, to get that attention.
I also have to imagine that just in general, you get a flood of engagement in the sense that, the comment section is long. You probably get a ton of DMs. Do you sort of have to throw your hands up at some point and say, like, I'm no longer going to have inbox zero? Or do you really try to like manage all of that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think in an ideal world, it would be great to respond to everybody and, to give them like a little comment back or a message back, but I don't usually respond to messages or read them. It's just, yeah, I think it's like, I have like you were saying earlier, I have kids to take care of. I have 4 dogs. I try to work out every day. So I have like a certain amount of time to put toward responding, and I try to do a little bit of it. But for me to respond to everything, I would have to hire somebody. And yeah, not at that point. I like doing the social media myself. Although we do have Destination Trail, we have Izzy doing the marketing media and the social media for that. So at least I don't have to worry about that whole piece.
That's interesting. So there might come a day where you would consider outsourcing at least a portion of your own personal profile.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I've definitely considered it. if nothing else, just to respond back to people, because I think that, I think that's a nice thing to do, and to be able to, give them a few moments of your time.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's worth it. But I don't try to make money off my social media. So it kind of would be silly to pay somebody to respond. I have for some reason, I have something against trying to, get sponsors to pay for
sure,
posts.
sure.
It's just, not what I use it for. It's my creative outlet, really, truly.
So, I have to imagine, Destination has partnerships for various, races. But do you have any sponsorships as an athlete currently, or have you kind of moved on from that era of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not completely opposed to it, but, with the foot issues I've had, I didn't want to have a shoe sponsor and not be able to try whatever shoes. For me, it's just easier to focus. There's just so little money, even for events on sponsorships, that it hasn't been worth it
Yeah,
for me to take the time to have sponsors. So as an athlete, I haven't taken on any sponsors in years. And I kind of let that go because it was really time consuming, and they were asking me to do all this promotion, and I'm getting barely any money. It's certainly not worth free product for me. I have too much product anyway. So yeah, I think I really kind of let that go and moved on. I don't know if this is like a new trend that maybe runners will do, but if I didn't have, a race organization, then I'd probably need to try to make money off that. But since I don't have to, it's just easier
yeah.
not to. And we actually barely have any sponsors even for the races,
Hmm.
because it's so time consuming. Like, I would need a whole nother employee to manage that part.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably know, like,
Oh,
sponsorships can be very challenging, and every single year, usually you have to get that relationship going and fight for what you think you're worth. It's hard.
you mentioned that for you, it's not quite worth it to get into like the sponsored post game, and there are a lot of athletes and prospective sponsored athletes that might find this interesting. So, to the extent that you're willing to talk about the trade-offs of like getting into that game, and what's involved, and why it ultimately wasn't worth it for you.
Well, I think I just don't like to sell things on social media, or in general. So I'll give you an example. At the races that I organize, my events, we have merchandise for sale. And if you put me behind that table, I'll be like, why is this so expensive? Let me give it to you half price. Like, I cannot, I'm not a salesperson. But, something like, you want to talk to me about 200 milers, like, that is something that the experience, like selling the experience of a race, like, I feel like I can do that, because it's just different for me. So I think for me, it would be very difficult to go on social media and be like, you know, these shoes are awesome, unless I had like been part of the creation of the shoe itself and I was really excited about it. Then I might be able to really get behind it. But I think it's just hard. It always feels a little fake to me, whether I'm reading it or on somebody else's social media. And I don't mind, like, I get it. And kudos to the folks who do that, because we're all entrepreneurs, and it's not easy. And I have done that. But I think I think with already having a business and not having to put myself out there to sell things online, could I make more money? Yes, but it's just not worth. Yeah, it just doesn't feel good to me.
I also wonder if we are coming up on this era of, call it like heightened due diligence. Again, we're recording this
Mm.
in late May 2024, and there's this whole spring energy gel, where they correct about the number of carbohydrates and calories in certain gels. Like, that is just like dominating at least my social media feed right now. And I wonder if there's going to be sort of like a ripple effect from that, where whether it's in the shoe industry or the gel industry or the gear industry, you name it, like, these athletes spend and anybody that was caught in the crosshairs of that, like if it encourages athletes to, and I mean podcasters like myself, etc., to spend way more time on the front end of things, like studying what you're about to enter into an agreement to, like requesting test results and stuff like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but like that's been my interpretation of this, is like, oh my gosh, like the bar is about to be raised significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's really important to make sure that you are aligned with the sponsors that you have. But there's only so much we can do to know that, you know. So Spring Energy, I used to run for them as an athlete.
Yeah.
I remember like loving the idea of these natural gels that were like plant, you know, based on real food. And I think over time, I realized like for me, the fruit was difficult to eat for a prolonged period of time in ultras. And as I moved out of getting sponsors, I just didn't want to keep doing like the athlete thing myself. So I declined a sponsorship several years ago as an athlete, but we have their gels at our races. And so now I'm in this boat of we have the Tahoe 200 coming up. We already have the product. There's no way to get something else at this point. But there's these huge questions of, you know, what's going on behind the scenes there. I don't know. I hope that they didn't know about the calorie and carbohydrate count. I'm not one to rush to judgment, but I think it would be great to get some answers. And I would love to see them just be really open. I don't think that's happened yet, and that's concerning. But I have to kind of figure out how I'm going to approach this for, you know, this race in 2 weeks, and then moving forward. But it's very concerning, and we need to be careful as athletes as well, you know, what we buy and how it
Gosh.
affects our bodies.
I mean, that's a great example of how, you know, the mistake that company made, assuming it's a mistake. I always like to err on the side of like maybe ignorance over malice, but to me, that's a really good example of how this mistake could theoretically, you know, put your part of your operation in danger, right? Like if you especially with a 200-mile event where, you know, things are very consequential at every single aid station, like it puts you in a super tough position. So um yeah, that's
Does.
wild.
Yeah.
uh
Yeah. And as a race, you know, that they sponsor our races, but it's not just like they're giving us free product. We are required to promote them in order to get that product. You know, the contract says this, right?
yeah.
And so it's the case for most events. You know, it's not just that companies are throwing product at us. We have to do things for them. So if the company is showing that there could be huge ethical concerns, if nothing else, how was there not oversight that didn't catch this sooner? Yeah, it's a huge concern. And we thought, you know, we were doing the runners a favor by having this kind of natural product on hand. So yeah, you just never know, and you can't expect every athlete to have done all the homework, you know, of every brand. But if you're involved in the creation of the product, then I think you need to probably answer for
Yeah.
things like this.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's not just destination, right? There's plenty of races out there that were in some sort of partnership with Spring, and so like it could be a ripple effect across the industry. I've been reading a lot of the comments. I don't want to get too hung up on this topic, but
Yeah.
one of the interesting things, a lot of athletes have been coming forward saying, you know, wow, like I couldn't pinpoint why I was bonking in this race, or just like lacking energy in the later stages of this 50K or 50-mile, whatever. Now I know that like I can probably chalk it up to Spring. But then other people have been saying, you know, wow, like I've actually kind of enjoyed Spring this whole time. And that kind of shocks me that I was fueling on such, you know, low numbers of carbs and carbohydrates. And so I wonder if there's like any research that can come out of this showing that like there can be a placebo effect or something where if you can, even just by thinking that you're consuming X amount of something, that can propel you. Again, that's super anecdotal, but I found that really interesting in the comments.
I think we can learn something from this though, because it's all about trusting our own bodies. The people who are saying, oh man, I was wondering why that race didn't go well, or my training runs were flat, all these things, right? If you're noticing these things, you have to trust yourself. And I think throughout the world in our lives, we're constantly being hit with, false advertising. And I'm sure there's a ton of other products like this that aren't really delivering what we expect. Think about supplements,
Sure.
right? We all know that a lot of supplements don't actually work, and yet people are taking them, thinking they work. And like you said, placebo is huge. I mean, I think that everything we do and take in, we have to believe, is doing a certain thing for it to even play its role. This all goes into like the state of reality and what is our experience in the world. But at the same time, like, we probably need to start trusting our own bodies more. And so at the end of the day, should a company like Spring know exactly what's in their product? Yes. And they should be advertising it. Yes. But we also on our side need to really be paying attention to our bodies and training. We need to be training with the nutrition we're going to use and making sure it works, because even if it was the right number of calories and carbohydrates, it still may not fuel us as well as X brand. And so we should be trying different things and seeing what works best, not just buying into the advertising that we see.
Yeah. This is sort of a question that could get us also into the sort of the 200-mile scene in your race directing career. But whether it was as an athlete or as a race director, and this is kind of a thorny question, but like over the last 10 to 15 years, being a female business owner, a female pro athlete, have you experienced, like, has it been tougher than being a man? Like, have you had any unfair experiences, or, sort of like compensation packages as an athlete, or just like unnecessary roadblocks in race directing that you can speak to, if that's even been an issue at all?
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? Because I haven't been a man, and I don't know what the experience would have been as one in the industry. There are times, certainly as an athlete, where you're the first place woman, and the first place guy had a whole motorcade, and all this media when he came through. But when you come through, it's just like, oh, nobody's out here. Like I had that experience, Ultra Fjord in Patagonia, and it wasn't like I was way back there. Like I think I was like third overall or something, and and there was just nothing at the finish line. So on the other hand, I'm also a race director, and I understand some of what happens to women, like if they're coming in after the men. There is this, like, you really have to be on it to make sure that you're covering with media the women as well, and it creates a longer time frame to be covering these events. And so is it hard? Yes, but I do think it would be great to see more effort put into covering men and women's fields, and I've struggled with that in my own events, with our own social media and 200s. So I understand how it happens, and when people and races cover men and women really well, they're putting a lot of effort in, because it's a lot easier to cover just men or just women than both. But yes, I've seen a difference, certainly as an athlete. As a race director, I think that the main, or a business owner in this industry, I think the main pushback that I've gotten is being kind of an outspoken woman business owner. I think that people can be a little more harsh on women than on men who are kind of outspoken in this industry, or being a successful business owner. I think that I see more negative comments for somebody like me than I think a man in the industry would get. And again, it's hard to say, but there are some like accounts online that are, most of the time they're like pretty funny, but like these kind of meme accounts, like they'll just trash me and then love on these male race directors who are doing similar things. And I'm like, what is it? am I an easy target, or is it, I don't know. But I think that women who are taking on that kind of masculine role, what's considered a masculine role in business, you know, they're, it's like that piece of grass that's kind of sticking up a little bit over the others. It's like keep getting chopped off at the top. So I think, it'd be great to see some of these people like have a little more awareness around, wait, why am I making fun of her so much when, I'm so positive and supportive of these male race directors? It kind of makes me wonder.
I'm sure other female athletes, maybe even aspiring female race directors, will reach out. What's the most common advice you give them for how to be in the sport, how to be in this industry?
I would say, fight tooth and nail to get what you want in terms of a contract, what you're worth. So if you're an athlete, it is incredibly important as a woman to know your worth, and ask for it, because the worst thing that's going to happen is they're not going to give you the money or the sponsorship. But the best thing that can happen is so great. You may get exactly what you ask for. And I think for me, I've never been afraid of asking as an athlete, hey, this is how much. I look at the contract like, no, I'm not, I'm not going to sign for 5 pairs of shoes over the course of the year and promote you 3 times a month. So I think it's important to just put your foot down if something doesn't feel right. And that's not easy for everybody. I understand. I think it comes a little more naturally to me, because I have friends who struggle with standing up for themselves that way. And in terms of being a race director, I have fought very hard to get permits for events, that I just knew it wasn't fair that we weren't getting the permits. Talk a little about the Tahoe 200 here. When I first came out with that race, they just were not going to allow me to put on an event there. And what ended up being a complete game changer is I realized that they told me they weren't permitting any new events in Tahoe. This is 2013. And then I saw that they were permitting Primal Quest, and Primal Quest moves around to different locations. So it was a new event in that area. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, I got you guys.
What did they say to that when you brought that up? What did they say?
They couldn't say anything. Yeah, they couldn't say anything. You know what they did end up saying? They said, well, there's some events that can only be done, in this area. And that was kind of the explanation. But that got me my foot in the door. So I just had decided that no matter what, I was going to make this event happen. Because doing a 200-mile race around Lake Tahoe, to me, it was just like, how could we not have an event like this? I was just going to make sure that I created it and brought it to life no matter what. And then I started contacting every person at the Forest Services high up. I kept going up the ladder until I finally was bugging like the guy in charge of all of California. And then his secretary called me back. We set up a meeting. And I finally got to say, okay, this is why we can only do the Tahoe 200 here in Lake Tahoe. And they agreed, and it worked.
I think that's a great lesson for everybody, in resourcefulness and in flexibility. Like, you can be paying attention to the scene at large. You see this other organization that's getting away with it, and you can sort of leverage that proof point to reopen the door. And then you don't necessarily go in the door with your pitchfork being like, why didn't you, permit Tahoe? It's like, oh, look here, this is happening. Let's have a conversation about next steps for Tahoe. So like that flexibility and kind of I don't know what the word is, but just like grace with them to just like stay on good terms. And ultimately, we're talking 12 years after the fact, and Tahoe 200 is an institution there.
Yeah. And I think back in those days of my race directing, I probably could have used a little more skills at diplomacy, because I would get upset, like, this isn't fair. And that approach, that served me so well doing an ultra marathon a day. Throw yourself against a brick wall as many times as you can until it breaks down. That doesn't work so well with permitting. And sometimes, you'll never get the permit if you push too hard. So I have had those circumstances too. There's kind of this little dance that you have to do, and sometimes you just can't get the permits. So there's little routes we've wanted to do on different races through different areas where we just haven't been able to get that particular trail. And there's events that I had to let go before they were even created because I just couldn't get the permits. But it's hard.
And maybe this is more a question for the Moab 240, but I guess it could apply to all your races. I'm thinking back to the early days of the event, and one of the reasons I think I was turned on to this scene was, I saw people like Courtney Dauwalter doing the race. Cam Haynes was very interested in it. David Goggins ran it. You got some really big names in the early years of these events to kind of help put on like that hockey stick growth, sort of like that, like escape velocity. Was that and I love marketing and I love business. Was this intentional on your part? Did you really have to fight tooth and nail to get some of these people onto the start line? Did it just kind of happen organically? Talk about that story.
Well, I was always interested in getting people to run the 200s who maybe were a little outside of the normal people that people would try to get to run competitively their events. So Cam Haynes was, my ex, who is my kid's dad, he's like, hey, you got to get this guy to run your 200s. He has a ton of followers. And I'd never heard of him. And I looked him up. I was like, wow, this guy has a lot of followers, looks interesting. It's a whole different demographic. So I just sent him a message and was like, hey, you should run my 200s. And he responded right back and was like, I'd love to do Bigfoot. And we kind of established, a relationship through that of, mutual respect. And I never asked anything specific of him, but he would share about the races, and then he goes on Joe Rogan, and then, it kind of blows up from there. So I think in some ways it was, I've reached out to a lot of different people like that, who you might not expect to. So David Goggins, I reached out to him, sent him a message, and he was also interested. It was a year before he ran Moab. He said, I'm too busy this year. I'll look at it again next year. And then, he sent me some messages back and did Moab. And so I think sometimes, even when you think that reaching out, somebody will never see your message, I can tell you that even people with really big accounts, they probably aren't getting as many messages as you think. Or somebody's looking through them, especially for something like David Goggins, somebody's looking through it for him, to kind of pull out the stuff the opportunities, let's say. So maybe not the case with everybody, but if you throw enough, things out there, eventually you'll get some bites. So yeah, I kind of thought from the marketing standpoint, it would just be really cool to have different demographics of people come out to the races, and those, Goggins, Cameron Haynes, they had that kind of interesting reach to me. Courtney, when she ran Moab, she hadn't done a lot of the big stuff. I think she had just won Run Rabbit Run and lost her eyesight near the end. I didn't even know who she was. And somebody's like, oh, Courtney's running. And then I looked up, I was like, oh, cool. And I think she kind of, in this case, was the one who took the risk. I'm going to do a race that people haven't really heard much about. It's kind of crazy. But it was just crazy enough that that's what got her on Joe Rogan, and this huge push of followers. But she's got this amazing talent at the same hand. And at the time we were sponsored by Salomon. So I think she got the entry through the Salomon sponsorship. And then I had flown out to, Salomon flew me and my other race director out to France that next spring to check out some of their festivals, to kind of play maybe with some of those ideas of doing it ourselves. And I'm talking to them in the headquarters. I'm like, how come Courtney isn't one of your international athletes, which is like the highest level? And they're like, she's not there yet. And I saw it. When she won Moab, I was like, I saw it. And so it was kind of cool to realize, from that early on. Was that 2017 that she ran, or
Probably 17 or maybe 18, but I think
18
17.
maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely saw when she just killed it at that distance, beat everybody, men and women. I was like, she's gonna do something cool. And yeah, she's just killing it.
It's so cool to me, just as an observer, to see what modern marketing strategies or just overall playbooks look like for events. I think you're really on the bleeding edge. I think for anyone listening, if they haven't picked up on it already, I think this idea of having, I've heard this phrase called the Dream 100 used, where like you have a list of 100 people that you would love to interact with or do business with, or just be in their orbit in some sort of way. And you kind of like really be proactive and strategic about making acquaintance, etc. And I feel like to some extent that was a part of your playbook, right? Where like you had this list of people that you would love to somehow get into these races, and it worked, and it paid massive dividends in addition to all the other things you're doing to kind of get things off the ground. But are there any other people that are on your short list to get into Bigfoot at some point, or this Arizona Monster 300 or Tahoe? Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who we I would be very open to people's ideas of who they think. I will say that since the events have been selling out, I've been thinking about it a little less, but I do also believe it's really important to be proactive with marketing, because just because you sell a race out this year doesn't mean that it will continue to be popular for every year. You look at events that used to be the most popular ultra races in the sport and people haven't even heard of now. So I do believe that I need to kind of stay on top of it. But so I don't have anybody really on the top of my mind, but I can say that, again, back to like, the people that you think are going to respond or even hear from you. I had sent Joe Rogan a message about doing the 200s as well, and I got a response back, which I thought was really cool. But at this
Interested,
point,
interested, not interested.
he would be, it sounds like, but he's not there in terms of like physically doing that many miles on his feet. That's what he said. So, but I thought it was cool that he responded. And yeah, at some point, he probably, when Cameron Haynes and him were talking, or Courtney Dauwalter, he had followed me on Instagram. So I think that's how my message got through to him. But yeah, I think that you can certainly, that's a cool thing about social media, is like you can reach people who in the past you wouldn't have been able to be in contact with. So it's always worth reaching out and trying.
I know we're a little bit over time. I just have one last question for you. I've heard the phrase many times that 200s are the new hundreds, and I'm starting to believe it, because we're in this era now where every single race, at least on the American circuit, it seems, is selling out like that, including all your races. What we can talk about them at the very end. Are you shocked that are you shocked that the scene has developed this fast, and you're at a point now where like you have to create new supply? You had to create this new Arizona race to meet all this demand. Talk about that.
I mean, if you had asked the 2013 me, who was creating the Tahoe 200 and had no idea if people would sign up, it's totally shocking. But now I've seen the response for so many years. What's interesting to me is that the Tahoe 200 came out first event in 2014, and it's taken almost 10 years for other people to go, oh, I'm going to put on a 200 miler. Almost 10 years. So I would say Cocodona came, 2021? Yeah, because I think 2020 was our first year, and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
If I remember. That was rough. And that put us all behind. But so they were the next to follow with the same kind of event. But really, you're now seeing more 200s, 10 years later. It just goes to show you, I think I think that's probably good in part because the demand has been growing. And if people had come out with this many 200s 5 years ago, they would go out of business. I mean, I think some people will struggle to get enough runners anyway, because the 200-mile scene is still very, very, very small. And it's going to get a little more spread out the more events there are. But I think that there's room for any new amazing event. You just got to have something unique, and people will come run it. So, yeah.
Well, Candice, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I mean, I'm looking at 10, 12 questions I want to ask. Maybe we'll have to have a round two at some point. I want to talk about staying relevant in the events industry, COVID, building community around each event. We can talk about it another time. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to talk about what's on the docket for destination with like the Arizona Monster, the Triple Crown, Tahoe. You have the floor.
Yeah. Well, we kind of unveiled this year the Arizona Monster 300, which has been a lot of work for me over the past 5 years. I put into exploring the area, coming up with maps. I moved to Arizona, the exact area that this race is going to be in. And a lot of that was motivated by really wanting to explore this area and come up with a really unique event. So I'm super proud of the route that we have and how it shows off southern Arizona, the Tucson area especially. And then we even had Joe Pagak, who is a local artist in Tucson, do our logo for it, and it's amazing. So it's been fun to pull in all those things that, because I was, living down there for some time, I was able to kind of know about and explore. But the Sonoran Desert is amazing. I mean, I think if you think of a desert, you probably wouldn't visualize like how green and lush and how many critters are out there. I see more animals out there than I do in Colorado or Washington. So it's incredible. And runners will go point to point from Patagonia, Arizona. We're going to start downtown in the city and then run 84% Singletrack trail all the way up to Superior, Arizona. And it's kind of incredible to have that much Singletrack. I wouldn't have wanted to put on the event with any less, but I couldn't be more excited about it. And it's next April. People can get on the wait list if they want and get a chance to run, but it did sell out in a week. I was actually running the Arizona Trail, and Garrett, my race director, he's like, I think I can handle all the registration without you, but I barely did any promotion, or, I was out of service when it opened. And I got a message from him. I think it was like 200 people had signed up in the first 30 minutes. It was just like, it was crazy. So I was shocked. But it was exciting because I've gotten to a point where I have enough events that I need multiple full-time employees. And if we don't sell out the events, then, we don't make a living. And I can't keep those kind of people on the payroll. And they're the key to the success of my events are, the full-time employees that work day in, day out at these events, like on the permitting, on the volunteer coordinating, on the food, and all the different details that we have to do every year.
So in terms of calls to action, what should people do? Sign up for Arizona, get on any wait list. There's lotteries. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, if people want to check out the events, we have 3 200-milers. The individual registrations open for Tahoe during the Tahoe 200, so that'll be in June. And for Bigfoot, during the Bigfoot 200 in August. So if you want to get in that lottery, you have a 2-week window. And if you don't get in it, you can always get on the wait list. And then Moab, the lottery always opens January, the year of the event. So the lottery for Moab will open January 2025, and that has become our most popular event. It's the hardest to get into, has the longest wait list, the fewest people getting off the wait list, but all 3 of the 200s are incredible. So I encourage you to, if you can't get into that one, to try for the others because they're amazing.
Awesome. Well, Candice, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.